The gunshot cracked across the open range like thunder, and Helena Sutton watched a man fall from his horse into the tall prairie grass, blood blooming across his chest as 3 riders circled his body like vultures. She had been picking wild berries near the creek that ran through her father's land, her basket half full and her thoughts occupied with the evening meal she would prepare. The year was 1883, and Fort Collins, Colorado, had grown from a military outpost into a thriving cattle town. But the vast stretches of rangeland beyond its borders remained wild and dangerous. Helena was 22 years old, unmarried despite her mother's endless worrying, and capable enough to venture out alone during daylight hours. She had never expected to witness cold-blooded murder. Her hands trembled as she crouched lower behind the cottonwood trees that lined the creek bank, her blue calico dress blending poorly with the summer greenery. The 3 men dismounted, and even from this distance, she could see them rifling through the dead man's pockets, their voices carrying on the wind though she could not make out their words. One of them wore a distinctive red bandana around his neck. Another had a scar visible even from where she hid, running from his temple to his jaw, and the third was heavyset with a black hat that sat low on his brow. Helena's heart hammered against her ribs. She needed to get back to the ranch house, needed to tell her father, needed to fetch the sheriff from town. But between her hiding spot and home lay a quarter-mile of open grassland, and if those men saw her running, they would know she had witnessed their crime. Her breath came in shallow gasps as she tried to think, tried to plan, but fear clouded her mind. The decision was made for her when her basket tipped over, berries spilling down the creek bank with a soft rustle that seemed to echo like an avalanche in her ears. All 3 men's heads snapped toward the sound, and the one with the scar pointed directly at her hiding place. Helena ran. Her boots pounded against the hard, packed earth as she abandoned any pretense of stealth, lifting her skirts high and sprinting toward a rocky outcropping she knew lay to the east. Behind her, she heard shouts and the thunder of hooves as the men mounted up. Terror gave her speed, but she knew she could not outrun horses. The outcropping grew closer, its weathered stones offering caves and crevices where she might hide, might buy herself time, might pray for a miracle. A rider appeared from the opposite direction, a lone cowboy on a paint horse, moving at a steady lope across the range. Helena's first instinct was to scream for help, but the sound died in her throat as uncertainty froze her. What if he was one of them? What if she ran straight into another killer's arms? The cowboy must have seen something in her desperate flight, in the way she kept glancing over her shoulder at her pursuers, because he suddenly spurred his horse into a gallop directly toward her. As he drew close, Helena could see he was young, perhaps 25 or 26, with dark hair beneath a worn brown hat and eyes that assessed the situation in an instant. "Climb on," he shouted, extending his arm toward her without slowing his horse. Helena had no choice but to trust him. She reached up, and his hand locked around her wrist with surprising strength, pulling her up behind him in one smooth motion as the paint horse barely broke stride. She wrapped her arms around his waist, clinging tight as he wheeled the horse around and urged it into a dead run toward the rocky outcropping. "What did you see?" he asked, his voice steady despite the danger. "Murder," she gasped against his back. "They shot a man. They saw me." He did not waste time with more questions. The outcropping loomed ahead, and he guided his horse into a narrow ravine that cut between the rocks, a passage Helena had not known existed. The walls rose up on either side, blocking them from view, and he slowed the paint to a walk, letting the animal catch its breath while listening intently for sounds of pursuit. "We cannot stay here long," he said quietly, dismounting and helping her down. "They will search these rocks." "I know a place, but we need to move on foot. Can you manage?" Helena nodded, her legs shaky but functional. "Who are you?" "Xander Jameson," he said, already tying his horse's reins to a scrub pine that grew from the rocks. He pulled his rifle from its scabbard and checked his revolver. "I work the Double R Ranch south of here." "You?" "Helena Sutton. My father owns the land where they killed that man." Her voice broke slightly on the last words, the reality of what she had witnessed finally sinking in. "We have to tell the sheriff." "We will," Xander said, his green eyes serious as they met hers. "But first we need to keep you alive long enough to tell him. Those men will search for you, and if they find you before we can get you to safety, your testimony dies with you. Can you shoot?" She shook her head. Her father had taught her basic skills with a rifle for hunting, but she had never shot at another person, never imagined she would need to. "Stay close to me then," Xander said. He moved deeper into the ravine, away from his horse, choosing a path that led upward over the rocks. Helena followed, her dress catching on stones and thorny bushes, but she bit back any complaint. Behind them, she heard voices echoing through the ravine, the three killers spreading out to search for her. Xander led her up and over the outcropping, then down the far side where the land fell away into a series of arroyos carved by spring floods. He moved with the confidence of someone who knew this land intimately, never hesitating as he chose their path. They slid down into a dry wash, the sandy bottom muffling their footsteps, and followed it for what seemed like miles. The sun beat down mercilessly, and Helena's throat grew parched, but she did not complain. Finally, as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Xander stopped at a place where the arroyo widened into a small canyon. A rock overhang created a shallow cave, invisible from above and defensible from below. A thin trickle of water seeped from the canyon wall, creating a small pool before disappearing back into the sand. "We will wait here until dark," Xander said, "then move under cover of night. It is too dangerous to travel in daylight when they are actively hunting for you." Helena sank down against the canyon wall, her legs finally giving out. Now that they had stopped moving, reaction set in. She began to shake, tears sliding down her cheeks as the image of that man falling from his horse played over and over in her mind. She had seen death before. This was the frontier after all, but never murder, never such cold brutality. Xander knelt beside her, his expression softening. "You are safe for now," he said quietly. "I will not let them find you." "You do not even know me," Helena whispered. "Why are you risking your life for a stranger?" He was silent for a moment, considering his answer. "Because it is the right thing to do," he finally said. "And because I cannot abide men who would hunt down a woman for witnessing their crimes. They made themselves my enemies the moment they started chasing you." She studied his face in the fading light, seeing determination there, and something else she could not quite name. Xander Jameson was handsome in a rugged way, with sun-weathered skin and calloused hands that spoke of hard work. But it was his eyes that held her attention, clear and direct, the eyes of a man who meant what he said. "Thank you," she said softly. He nodded and moved to the mouth of their shelter, keeping watch while the shadows lengthened. Helena drank from the small pool, the water cool and sweet, and tried to gather her scattered thoughts. Her father would be worried when she did not return home for supper. He would search for her, and might stumble into those killers himself. The thought made her stomach clench with fresh fear. "My father," she said urgently, "he will come looking for me." "Where is your family's ranch?" Xander asked. "About 3 miles northwest of here, near the junction of the Cashla Powder River and Spring Creek." "I know it," Xander said. "The Sutton place. Your father is Thomas Sutton, yes." Do you know him, by reputation? He is known as an honest man. Xander frowned, thinking. Once it is full dark, I will scout ahead. If the way is clear, we can make for your ranch. If not, we head south to the Double R and get help there. Either way, we get you somewhere safe and gather men to go after those killers. Who was the man they killed? Helena asked. Did you see? Xander shook his head. I was too far away. But if it happened on your father's land, there must be a reason. Could have been a drifter, or could be something more. Has your father had any trouble lately? Disputes over water rights or grazing land? Helena thought back over recent weeks. There was a man who came by about a month ago, wanting to buy a section of our land near the river. Father refused. The man became angry, said father would regret it, but we thought he was just bitter about being turned away. What did this man look like? Xander's voice had taken on a sharp edge. Tall, with a scar on his face, Helena said slowly, and then her breath caught. Like the man I saw today. Oh God, do you think this is about our land? Could be, Xander said grimly. Some men think they can take what they want through force if they cannot buy it. If they killed someone on your land, they might be trying to scare your family away or frame you for murder or both. The implications made Helena's head spin. This was not just random violence then, but something calculated, something aimed at her family. We have to warn my father, she said, starting to rise. Xander gently pushed her back down. We will, but not yet. It is still too light, and they will be watching the approaches to your ranch. We wait another hour, maybe two. I promise you, we will get to your father. The waiting was agony. Helena sat in the growing darkness, listening to every sound, imagining killers behind every shadow. Xander remained a calm presence at the cave mouth, patient and alert. As the minutes crawled by, she found herself studying him again, wondering about this man who had risked everything to save her. You have family at the Double R, she asked, needing to break the oppressive silence. No family, Xander said. I have been working there for 3 years since I came to Colorado from Kansas. My parents died when I was young. Fever took them both within a week of each other. I have been on my own since I was 16. I am sorry, Helena said, hearing the old pain beneath his matter-of-fact words. It was a long time ago, Xander replied. I learned to stand on my own feet, learned to be careful about who I trust, but I also learned that there are still good people in this world worth protecting. Is that why you helped me? Because you believe I am one of the good people? He turned to look at her, and even in the darkness she could feel the intensity of his gaze. I helped you because you needed help, and I happened to be there. Whether you are good or bad, no one deserves to be hunted down like an animal. But for what it is worth, yes, I think you are one of the good ones. Something warm unfurled in Helena's chest at his words. She barely knew this man, and yet he had already shown more courage and integrity than men she had known her whole life. I think you are one of the good ones too, she said softly. Xander smiled, a brief flash of white teeth in the darkness. Then we will get along just fine, Miss Sutton. Helena, she corrected. If we are running for our lives together, you can call me Helena. Helena, he repeated, and she liked the way her name sounded in his deep voice. And you can call me Xander. As full darkness fell, Xander prepared to move. He had Helena stay close behind him as they crept out of their hiding place and began the careful journey toward her family's ranch. The night was clear, stars blazing overhead in the vast Colorado sky, providing just enough light to navigate by. They moved in silence, Xander stopping frequently to listen and scan their surroundings. They had covered perhaps a mile when Xander suddenly pulled Helena down into the grass, his hand over her mouth to prevent any surprised sound. A moment later, she heard what had alerted him: hoofbeats and low voices. 2 riders passed within 20 yards of where they lay pressed flat against the earth, so close Helena could smell tobacco smoke and hear one man complaining about the search. "That woman could be anywhere by now," the man grumbled. "Could have made it back to town already." "Boss says we keep looking," another voice replied. This one sent chills down Helena's spine because she recognized it from the murder scene, the man with the scar. She saw too much. "We cannot have her talking to the law. Check the Sutton ranch again, make sure she has not shown up there." "We already checked twice." "Then we check a third time. And if she shows up, we make it look like rustlers hit the place. Burn it all, leave no witnesses." The riders moved on, their voices fading into the night. Xander kept Helena down for several more minutes, making sure they were truly gone, before carefully rising. His expression was hard, angry in a way she had not seen before. "They plan to burn your ranch and kill anyone there," he said quietly. "We need to move faster. Can you run?" Helena nodded, fear giving her strength. They set off at a faster pace, abandoning caution for speed. Her lungs burned and her legs ached, but she pushed herself to keep up with Xander's long strides. The terrain was treacherous in the darkness, full of hidden holes and rocks that could break an ankle, but somehow they managed. They topped a rise and saw the Sutton ranch spread out below them, lamplight glowing in the windows of the main house. Everything looked peaceful, ordinary, but Helena knew that peace was about to be shattered. Even as they started down the slope, she saw movement near the barn, shadows that did not belong there. "They are already here," Xander breathed. He pulled his rifle and checked the action. "Stay behind me. We go in quiet, try to get to the house before they realize we are here." But fate had other plans. A dog barked, Helena's father's old hound, and the shadows near the barn spun toward the sound. Someone shouted, and suddenly lamplight spilled from the barn as men emerged. Helena counted 4, no 5, more than the 3 killers she had seen earlier. They had brought reinforcements. "Father!" Helena screamed, abandoning any pretense of stealth. "Father, get out of the house!" The front door of the ranch house flew open and Thomas Sutton emerged, a shotgun in his hands. He was a big man, 50 years old but still strong, and his face went from confused to furious in an instant as he took in the scene. His daughter running toward him, a strange cowboy with her, and armed men near his barn. "Helena!" he roared. "Get inside!" Gunfire erupted. Xander returned fire, his rifle cracking twice in quick succession, and one of the men near the barn went down. Thomas Sutton discharged both barrels of his shotgun toward the other men, forcing them to dive for cover. In the chaos, Xander grabbed Helena's hand and sprinted for the house. They made it through the door and Thomas slammed it shut behind them, already breaking open his shotgun to reload. Helena's mother, Mary, stood in the hallway with a rifle, her face pale but determined. "What is happening?" Thomas demanded, shoving fresh shells into his shotgun. "Helena, who are these men?" "I saw them murder someone on our land this afternoon," Helena said breathlessly. "They have been hunting me all day. This is Xander Jameson. He saved my life. Father, they plan to burn the ranch and kill all of us." Thomas and Mary exchanged a look, years of marriage allowing them to communicate without words. "We need to fort up," Thomas said. "Windows and doors barricaded. Mary, get the ammunition boxes. Helena, help her. Mr. Jameson, can you shoot?" "Yes, sir," Xander said, already moving to a window that faced the barn. "I count 5 men out there, but there may be more. They have us pinned down." "The ranch hands?" Helena asked desperately, thinking of the 3 men who worked for her father. "Sent them to Fort Collins yesterday with a cattle shipment," Thomas said grimly. "We are on our own until someone hears the shooting and comes to investigate." The siege began in earnest. The men outside kept up sporadic fire, testing the house's defenses, looking for weak points. Xander and Thomas returned fire carefully, making every shot count and preventing the attackers from getting close enough to set fires. The night wore on, each minute feeling like an hour, the smell of gunpowder thick in the air. During a lull in the shooting, Xander spoke quietly to Thomas. "Sir, I need to get to my horse. It is hidden in the rocks east of here. If I can reach it and make it to the Double R, I can bring back help. There are 20 ranch hands there, all good men who can shoot." "That is suicide," Thomas said flatly. "You will never make it through their line." "I can make it," Xander said with quiet confidence. "I grew up learning to move quiet. Give me a distraction, something to draw their attention, and I can slip out the back." Helena, listening from where she was reloading rifles, felt her heart clench. "No," she said sharply, "you will be killed." Xander turned to look at her, his eyes steady. "If I stay here, we all die when they eventually rush the house or set it on fire. This is the only chance." "He is right," Thomas said heavily. "Mary, get some dark clothes for Mr. Jameson. Helena, help me prepare the distraction." Helena wanted to argue, wanted to find another way, but she knew they were right. With shaking hands, she helped her father prepare bundles of old rags soaked in lamp oil, crude but effective for creating smoke and confusion. Her mother brought out one of her father's old work shirts and dark trousers, and Xander changed quickly, stripping off his lighter-colored shirt. "You come back," Helena said fiercely as Xander prepared to leave through the back window. "You hear me? You come back safely." He reached out and touched her cheek gently, a brief contact that sent electricity through her despite everything. "I will come back," he promised. "You have my word." Thomas lit the oil-soaked rags and threw them out the front windows, creating billowing smoke that drew immediate gunfire from the attackers. In the chaos, Xander slipped out the back window and disappeared into the darkness. Helena held her breath, listening for a shout or gunshot that would signal his capture, but heard nothing. He had made it clear, at least for now. The next hours were the longest of Helena's life. She reloaded rifles, kept watch at the windows, and tried not to think about everything that could go wrong with Xander's desperate ride. The attackers had realized their quarry had been reinforced and seemed content to wait, keeping the house surrounded but not risking a direct assault. They knew that eventually, time would work in their favor. Dawn was breaking when Helena heard it, the thunder of many hooves approaching fast. She rushed to the window and saw a sight that made her knees weak with relief. Xander rode at the head of a group of at least 15 armed men, all of them moving at a gallop toward the ranch. The besiegers heard them too, and suddenly the dynamics shifted. The hunters became the hunted. Some of the attackers tried to flee, but they were cut off and surrounded. Others threw down their weapons, hands raised in surrender. The battle, such as it was, ended almost before it began. The Double R Ranch hands had brought overwhelming force, and the killers had no stomach for a fair fight. Helena flew out the front door despite her father's protests, running toward Xander as he dismounted. He caught her in his arms, and for a moment they just held each other, relief and joy and something more flooding through both of them. "You came back," Helena breathed against his chest. "I promised I would," Xander said, his arms tight around her. "Are you hurt? Is anyone hurt? We are all fine," Helena assured him, pulling back to look up into his face. "Thanks to you." The ranch hands had rounded up the survivors. 3 men captured alive, 2 dead including the one Xander had shot during the initial exchange. The man with the scar was among the living, his face sullen as he was bound and disarmed. Thomas Sutton approached Xander, extending his hand. "You saved my family, Mr. Jameson. I owe you a debt I can never repay." "No debt, sir," Xander said, shaking Thomas's hand. "I did what anyone should do." "But most would not have," Thomas said firmly. You risked your life twice now for people who were strangers to you yesterday. That takes a special kind of courage. The sheriff arrived by mid-morning, alerted by the ranch hands on their way to the Double R. Helena gave her statement, describing in detail the murder she had witnessed and identifying the scarred man as one of the killers. The other survivors talked readily enough once they realized the noose was already around their necks, each trying to save himself by blaming the others. The story that emerged was both simple and ugly. The scarred man, whose name was Curtis Drake, had wanted the Sutton land for its water rights. When Thomas refused to sell, Drake and his men had murdered a drifter on Sutton property, planning to frame Thomas for the killing and force him to flee or face trial. Helena's presence had been an unwelcome complication, one Drake had decided to eliminate along with the entire Sutton family. "You will all hang for this," the sheriff said grimly to the prisoners. "Murder, attempted murder, conspiracy. I will see you dance at the end of a rope before summer ends." Drake said nothing, but the hate in his eyes as he looked at Helena made her shiver. Xander, standing beside her, shifted slightly closer, a protective presence that did not go unnoticed. As the prisoners were loaded into a wagon for transport to Fort Collins, Thomas pulled Xander aside. Helena, helping her mother clean up the house, could see them talking but could not hear the words. Whatever her father said made Xander glance her way, a slight smile crossing his face before he nodded seriously at something Thomas said. Later, as the sun climbed toward noon and things began to return to normal, Helena found herself alone with Xander near the corral. His paint horse, retrieved from its hiding place by the Double R men, grazed peacefully, none the worse for its adventure. "Your father offered me a job," Xander said without preamble. "Foreman position, more money than the Double R pays, and a cabin of my own on the property." Helena's heart jumped. "What did you say?" "I told him I would need to give proper notice to the Double R, but that I would be honored to accept." He turned to face her fully, his green eyes serious. "But I also told him that my decision depended on whether a certain young woman might welcome having me nearby." "And what did he say to that?" Helena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "He said that the young woman in question was old enough to make her own choices, but that if I proved myself to be an honorable man, he would not object to me courting her properly." Xander took a step closer. "So I am asking you, Helena Sutton, would you welcome me staying on your family's ranch? Would you allow me to court you?" Helena felt tears sting her eyes, but these were tears of joy. In the space of a single day and night, this man had become impossibly important to her. He had risked everything to save her life, had shown courage and integrity and kindness. Looking at him now, she could not imagine him leaving, could not imagine not seeing him every day. "Yes," she said simply. "To both questions. Yes." Xander's face broke into a wide smile, and he took both her hands in his. "Then I will be the luckiest man in Colorado," he said softly. "I promise you, Helena, I will spend every day proving myself worthy of you." "You already proved that," Helena said, squeezing his hands. "Last night when you could have ridden away but chose to help instead. When you came back with reinforcements knowing you might arrive too late. You are already worthy, Xander Jameson." He pulled her closer, and she went willingly into his embrace. They stood together in the morning sunshine, holding each other, while around them the ranch came back to life. Helena's parents watched from the porch, Mary leaning against Thomas's shoulder, and both of them were smiling. The weeks that followed were busy ones. Xander gave his notice to the Double R, whose foreman released him with handshakes and good wishes. The cabin that would become Xander's home was cleaned and repaired, though he spent most of his time working alongside Thomas to learn every aspect of the Sutton Ranch operation. He was a quick study and a tireless worker, up before dawn and often working past dusk. But he always made time for Helena. They rode together across the range eland, and he showed her the hidden places he had discovered during his years working in the area. A waterfall hidden in a canyon, a meadow where wildflowers grew in riotous profusion, a high point that offered a view of the mountains stretching away to the west. They talked for hours, sharing stories of their lives, their dreams, their fears. Helena learned that Xander loved horses above all other animals, that he had a gift for breaking even the wildest mustang with patience rather than force. He learned that Helena had always wanted to travel, to see cities and oceans, but also that she loved the ranch and the life it offered. They discovered shared values: honesty, hard work, loyalty, the importance of family even if Xander had lost his own. The attraction between them grew with each passing day. Stolen kisses behind the barn, held hands during evening walks, long looks across the dinner table that made Mary hide smiles and Thomas clear his throat meaningfully. By the time summer faded into autumn, everyone on the ranch and in Fort Collins knew that Xander Jameson and Helena Sutton were courting, and that it was serious. The trial of Curtis Drake and his surviving men took place in September. Helena testified clearly and calmly, her account never wavering despite the defense attorney's attempts to rattle her. Xander sat in the courtroom gallery every day, a steady presence that gave her strength. The jury deliberated less than an hour before returning guilty verdicts on all charges. Drake and 2 of his men were sentenced to hang, the others to long prison terms. On the day of the execution, Helena stayed home, not wanting to witness death even for men who had tried to kill her. Xander stayed with her, and they walked together to the creek where this had all begun, where she had been picking berries on that fateful afternoon. "You ever wish it had not happened?" Xander asked quietly. "That you had stayed home that day, never seen what you saw?" Helena considered the question carefully. "I wish that man had not been murdered," she said slowly. "I wish Drake and his men had not been so evil, but I cannot wish away the rest because then I never would have met you. And meeting you, Xander, was the best thing that ever happened to me." He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "I love you," he said, the words simple but weighted with emotion. "I think I started falling in love with you the moment you climbed onto my horse, trusting me when you had no reason to, and I have fallen deeper every day since." "I love you too," Helena whispered against his chest. "You are the bravest, kindest, most honorable man I have ever known. I cannot imagine my life without you in it." Xander pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. "Then marry me," he said. "I know we have only known each other a few months, but I am certain, Helena, you are the one I want to spend my life with. Say you will marry me." Joy exploded through Helena's chest. "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, I will marry you." He kissed her then, deep and long and full of promise, and Helena kissed him back with all the love in her heart. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and grinning, Xander reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold band. "It was my mother's," he said softly. "The only thing I have left of her. I would be honored if you would wear it." Helena held out her left hand, tears streaming down her face, and Xander slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as though it had been made for her, and she stared at it through her tears, overwhelmed by the enormity of this moment. They were married in November, in a small church in Fort Collins with half the town in attendance. Helena wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her smaller frame, and carried wildflowers that had been carefully preserved since summer. Xander wore a new suit purchased especially for the occasion, and when he saw Helena walking down the aisle toward him, his eyes grew bright with unshed tears. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. They exchanged traditional vows, promising to love and honor each other in sickness and health, for richer or poorer, until death parted them. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Xander kissed his bride to cheers and applause from the gathered community. The reception was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and enough food to feed an army. The Double R hands came, and neighboring ranchers, and townspeople who had known Helena her whole life. There was music and dancing and laughter, celebration that lasted well into the night. But eventually, Helena and Xander slipped away to the cabin that was now their home, their refuge, the place where they would build their life together. Xander carried her over the threshold, both of them laughing, and set her down gently in the main room. "Welcome home, Mrs. Jameson," he said softly. "Welcome home, Mr. Jameson," Helena replied, reaching up to cup his face in her hands. "I love you so much." "I love you more," Xander said, and kissed her. That night, they became husband and wife in all ways, giving themselves to each other with love and tenderness and joy. Helena had been nervous, uncertain, but Xander was patient and gentle, making sure she felt safe and cherished every moment. And when she woke the next morning in his arms, watching dawn light creep through the cabin windows, she felt a happiness so complete it almost frightened her. Their first year of marriage was not without challenges. That winter proved harsh, with heavy snows that made it difficult to care for the cattle. Helena learned she was pregnant in January, and the morning sickness laid her low for weeks. Xander worried over her constantly, driving her to distraction with his hovering, until she finally told him firmly that she was not made of glass and would not break. But through it all, their love deepened and strengthened. They learned each other's rhythms, how to fight fair when disagreements arose, how to support each other through difficulties. Xander proved himself an excellent foreman, respected by the ranch hands and valued by Thomas for his sound judgment. Helena discovered reserves of strength she had not known she possessed, working alongside the men when needed despite her growing belly. Their son was born in September of 1884, a healthy baby boy they named Thomas Xavier Jameson, combining her father's name with Xander's. Little Tommy had his father's green eyes and his mother's dark hair, and from his first breath, he ruled the household with tiny fists and lusty cries. Xander was a devoted father, taking to parenthood with the same wholehearted commitment he brought to everything else. He would walk the floors at night when Tommy could not sleep, singing old cowboy songs in his deep voice until the baby quieted. He built a cradle with his own hands, carved with horses and mountains, a work of art that would be used by all their children. Helena watched her husband with their son and fell in love with him all over again. This man who had saved her life had given her so much more: a home, a family, a love that grew stronger every day. She could barely remember the frightened young woman who had hidden by the creek that summer afternoon, though it had been barely more than a year ago. That woman had become someone new, someone stronger, someone who knew her own worth. Thomas Sutton, for his part, could not have been happier with his son-in-law. He began to step back from daily ranch operations, trusting Xander to make decisions and handle problems. Mary delighted in her grandson, spoiling him shamelessly and laughing at Xander's protests that they were raising a tyrant. Life settled into comfortable patterns. Seasons turned, bringing their changes and challenges, but the Sutton Jameson family faced them together. The ranch prospered under Xander's management, growing steadily as they acquired more land and cattle. Fort Collins grew too, transforming from a rough frontier town into a more civilized community with schools and churches and businesses. Helena gave birth to a daughter in 1886, a beautiful baby girl they named Rose Elizabeth. Tommy, now a sturdy 2-year-old, was initially uncertain about this new addition but quickly became a protective big brother. Rose had her mother's smile and her father's stubborn determination, a combination that promised future adventures. 2 more children followed, Samuel in 1888 and Grace in 1890. The cabin, which had seemed spacious for a young couple, became cramped with 4 children, and Xander built an addition, doubling its size and adding a second story. Each nail he drove, each board he placed, was an act of love, building a home large enough to hold their growing family. The children grew up hearing the story of how their parents met, though Helena and Xander edited it for young ears, making it an adventure rather than the terrifying ordeal it had been. Tommy loved the tale, making Xander tell it over and over, especially the part where his father had pulled his mother onto his horse and ridden to safety. "When I grow up, I am going to be brave like you, Papa," Tommy would declare, and Xander would ruffle his hair and tell him he could be anything he wanted. Rose preferred her mother's stories of picking berries and exploring the range, already showing signs of the independent spirit that would define her. Samuel was quieter, more thoughtful, content to follow his older siblings and observe. And little Grace was pure sunshine, laughing at everything, finding joy in the smallest things. Time passed as it always does. Thomas Sutton, grown old and content, passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1893 with Mary and Helena and all the grandchildren gathered around his bed. They buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch he had built, and at the funeral, the preacher spoke of a life well lived, of a good man who had raised a strong daughter and welcomed a fine son into his family. Mary, heartbroken but resilient, moved into the main house with Helena and Xander. She said the foreman's cabin held too many memories, that she needed the noise and chaos of her grandchildren to help her heal. In truth, she was a blessing, helping with the children and the household while Helena increasingly took over the ranch's business affairs. For Helena had discovered she had a head for numbers and negotiations, skills that complemented Xander's practical knowledge of ranching. Together they made a formidable team, he managing the land and cattle while she handled accounts and contracts. The Sutton Ranch, now officially the Sutton Jameson Ranch, became one of the most successful operations in northern Colorado. But success never changed Xander. He remained the same honest, hard-working man Helena had fallen in love with, still up before dawn to check the cattle, still willing to dig out fence posts or doctor sick animals alongside his hired hands. He taught his sons to ride and rope, to treat animals with kindness, to keep their word no matter what. He taught his daughters that they were as capable as any man, that they should never let anyone tell them otherwise. And every evening, no matter how tired he was, he would kiss Helena and tell her he loved her. Every night they would lie together in their bed, talking about the day, making plans for tomorrow, simply being together. The passion of their youth had mellowed into something deeper, richer, a love tested by time and hardship and found unbreakable. Helena would sometimes think back to that afternoon by the creek, to the moment that had changed everything. She had witnessed something terrible, had been hunted and terrified, had nearly lost everything. But from that darkness had come the greatest light. Xander, her love, her partner, her best friend. She could not regret what had happened because it had brought her to exactly where she was supposed to be. The years rolled on into the new century. Tommy grew into a fine young man, taking over much of the ranch work and eventually marrying a schoolteacher from Fort Collins. Rose, true to her independent nature, moved to Denver to attend teachers' college, returning home with a degree and a husband who was willing to support her dreams. Samuel surprised everyone by developing a talent for veterinary medicine, apprenticing with a doctor in Cheyenne before returning to serve the ranchers of the region. Grace, the baby, married young to a neighboring rancher's son, giving Helena and Xander their first grandchildren. Mary Sutton lived to see all her grandchildren grown and married, passing away peacefully at the age of 78, surrounded by 3 generations of family. They buried her next to Thomas on the hill, and Helena grieved but also found comfort in knowing her mother had lived a full life and died happy. Helena and Xander grew older together, their hair turning gray, their faces gaining lines that mapped years of laughter and love. Xander's hands, worn by decades of hard work, developed arthritis that made some tasks difficult, but he never complained. Helena's eyes grew weaker, requiring spectacles for reading, but she maintained the sharp mind that had made her such an effective business partner. They stepped back gradually from daily ranch operations, turning things over to Tommy and his wife, but they never fully retired. Xander still rode out to check the cattle when he could, and Helena still reviewed the accounts, offering advice when asked. The ranch was their legacy, built through years of hard work and love, and they wanted to ensure it would thrive for generations to come. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a grand party. The whole community turned out to celebrate, and Xander and Helena found themselves the center of attention, surrounded by friends and family. Tommy stood up to give a speech, talking about his parents' love story, how they had met during danger and violence but had built a life of peace and prosperity. "My father saved my mother's life," Tommy said, his voice thick with emotion. "But she saved his too in a different way. She gave him a family, a home, a reason to stay in one place and put down roots. They saved each other, and in doing so, they created all of this." He gestured around at the gathered crowd, at the children and grandchildren. "We are all here because of their love, and we are all better because of their example." Helena, sitting beside Xander with his hand clasped in hers, felt tears sliding down her cheeks. Xander squeezed her hand, his own eyes wet, and leaned over to whisper in her ear. "Best decision I ever made was pulling you onto my horse that day," he said softly. "Best decision I ever made was trusting you," Helena whispered back. They danced that night, a slow waltz that accommodated their aging bodies, moving together with the ease of long practice. Around them, their children and grandchildren danced too, multiple generations celebrating love and family and life. It was, Helena thought, absolutely perfect. The years continued their march. Helena lost Xander in the winter of 1911 when he was 63 years old. He caught pneumonia while out checking on cattle during a blizzard, and despite the doctor's best efforts, his lungs could not recover. He died in their bed, in the cabin he had expanded with his own hands, with Helena holding him and whispering that she loved him, would always love him. "You gave me everything," she told him through her tears. "You were my hero, my love, my life. Thank you for choosing me." "Always you," Xander managed to say, his voice weak but certain. "Every day I would choose you, every day." Those were his last words. He closed his eyes and slipped away, and Helena felt as though her heart had been torn from her chest. They had been married 28 years, together for 29, and she could not imagine existing without him. They buried him on the hill beside Thomas and Mary, under a headstone that read, "Xander Jameson, beloved husband, father, and friend, a man of honor." Helena stood at the graveside long after everyone else had left, talking to him, telling him she would be strong, would honor his memory, would make sure their children and grandchildren knew what kind of man he had been. The grief was nearly unbearable at first. Helena would wake in the night reaching for him, only to find the bed empty. She would see something she wanted to tell him, turn to speak, and remember he was gone. Her children worried about her, Tommy especially, but she refused to let grief destroy her. Xander would not have wanted that. So she kept living, kept working, kept being a mother and grandmother and great-grandmother. She told stories about Xander constantly, keeping his memory alive for the youngest generation who had barely known him. She made sure everyone understood that he had been a hero, not just in saving her life, but in every day of quiet courage and integrity he had lived. Helena Jameson lived another 15 years, finally passing away in her sleep at the age of 76 in 1926. Her last coherent words spoken to Tommy as he sat by her bedside were about Xander. "I am going to see him again," she said with a smile. "I have missed him so much, but it was worth it, every moment we had together. Tell them all that, Tommy. Tell them love is worth everything." They buried her beside Xander on the hill, under a headstone that matched his. Helena Jameson, beloved wife, mother, and friend, a woman of courage. The funeral drew hundreds of people, from Fort Collins and beyond, everyone wanting to pay their respects to a woman who had been a pillar of the community for decades. Tommy stood at the graveside, now an old man himself, and looked at his parents' headstones side by side. He thought about the story he had grown up hearing, about danger on the range and a cowboy who had risked everything to save a witness, about love that had grown from crisis into something beautiful and lasting. "You saved each other," he said softly, speaking to the parents who could no longer hear him. "And you saved all of us too by showing us what real love looks like. Thank you for that. Thank you for everything." The Sutton Jameson Ranch continued for generations after, passed down through the family, each generation adding their own chapter to the story. But they all knew where it had started, with a murder witnessed, a chase across the rangeland, and a cowboy who had chosen to be a hero. With a love that had been forged in danger and refined by time into something precious and eternal. The hill where 4 generations were eventually buried became a family landmark, a place where descendants would come to remember where they came from. And always, when they visited, they would stop longest at the graves of Xander and Helena, the couple whose love story had started it all. The legend grew over time, as legends do, but at its heart was a simple truth. 2 people had found each other in the worst of circumstances and had chosen to build something beautiful together. They had faced danger and loss and hardship, but they had faced it together, and that had made all the difference. In the end, Helena's testimony had sent killers to justice. Xander's courage had saved innocent lives, but their greatest legacy was not measured in criminals caught or lives saved. It was measured in the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried their blood and their values forward into the future. It was measured in a ranch that still thrived more than a century after that fateful day by the creek. It was measured in a love story that families still told around dinner tables, teaching new generations what real love looked like. Because Helena had been the only witness to a murder on the range. A cowboy had hidden her and hunted the killers down. And in doing so, they had found each other and built a love that transcended time itself, proving that even in the darkest moments, hope and love can flourish, creating light that never dies.